Support for First Coast Connect is provided in part by Baptist Health and North Florida TPO.
Welcome to First Coast Connect. I'm Hethel Putt, in for Ann Schindler. Voters will decide whether to cut property taxes in November, but those proposed changes are already drawing legal challenges. Then the pushback against data centers, the latest county in our area to say, not in our backyard. Later in the program, a documentary highlighting how St. Augustine played center stage in the brutal civil rights fight in the South. The filmmaker joins us live in studio. But first, we're joined, as we are every month, by attorney, author, and local government expert Chris Hand to help us make sense of local and state issues. Chris, thank you so much for being here this morning.
Good morning, Hethel. Great to see you.
Let's start off with the property tax amendment. Two former elected officials from Florida and a nonprofit group have sued the state, arguing the ballot summary will mislead voters. Why is that?
Well, that's right, Hethel. This is going to be the first in what I expect will be a series of legal challenges against this amendment. You know, this amendment is probably one of the most impactful ballot initiatives that Floridians will see for a decade. It has the potential to dramatically change local government revenue, kind of shift the balance of power from local governments to state government. So naturally, it's attracting a lot of scrutiny, including, as you say, from current and former local elected officials. This particular lawsuit that's been filed in circuit court in Leon County argues that the ballot summary, what appears on the ballot describing the amendment, is biased, that it advocates more than it actually provides factual information to describe kind of what the amendment would do. So that's now going to be pending. If this lawsuit were to be successful, the courts would order the Attorney General of Florida to redo the ballot summary so that it doesn't contain, the language that, these litigants have said is advocacy more than just providing information. But again, I think this is just going to be the first in a series of legal challenges. There are a number of provisions of this somewhat kind of hastily assembled amendment that I think are likely to come under sort of legal scrutiny, including one, Hethel, where there's a provision in this that says that you have to be a Florida resident by December 31st, 2026 in order to take advantage of the amendment's benefits. And if you're not, you have to wait for 5 years. In the early 1980s, the Florida Supreme Court struck down a nearly identical provision in a previous constitutional amendment as being violative of both the state and federal constitutions. So it's, I think it's very likely someone's going to sue on those grounds, and ultimately the Florida Supreme Court's going to have the final say.
And just to be clear, that will not take it off the ballot. It'll just change the language if they see necessary, but it will be on the ballot. Remind the listeners what the amendment would do if passed.
Sure. Like I said, it's a very significant amendment to the Florida Constitution. It does require 60% of the vote to pass. We have a heightened standard for passing constitutional amendments. But what it would do, Hethel, is raise the current homestead exemption for property taxes from $50,000 now to $150,000 in 2027 and $250,000 in 2028. So we're talking about a 500% increase in the homestead exemption. It would also lower the amount, the cap for non-homestead valuation. So as you know, right now under Florida law, because of the Save Our Home amendments, if you're continuing to live in your property, they can't raise the valuation of that more than 3% a year because of that Save Our Home amendment. Any non-homestead property is subject to a cap of 10% a year on valuation increases. This amendment would also lower that cap to 5%. So we're talking about two very substantial changes that would have a huge impact on local government revenues. In fact, the state's own economists have predicted that collectively among local, city and county governments around the state, next year, 2027, we'll see about a $5 billion collective impact, jumping up to as much as $9 billion, $10 billion, and $11 billion in the out years. Just here in Jacksonville, the city of Jacksonville city council auditors have predicted this will have a $300 million impact on the city's $2 billion budget. So we're talking about very significant changes to local government budgets, not schools because they're exempted, but city and county budgets around the state that provide the core services people often think of: police, fire, public works, parks.
In fact, half of our city's budget $1 billion of that $2 billion goes towards police and fire. I want to take a call now from John in Riverside. Good morning, John.
Good morning. One of the questions I have about DeSantis's initiative here, since the 60% hurdle is so hard to pass, and this is such a controversial thing with the funding and all that, could this simply be a get out the vote move? In the past, they've put issues about controversial things like abortion or gay rights on the ballot simply to drive voters to the polls. There are probably with an unpopular president, there are a lot of Republicans that might sit on their hands and not vote this time in a midterm election. But if you put the property tax on, they might show up.
What are your thoughts on that, Chris?
I don't know what all the exact motives of the proponents of this amendment are. I think there are some who truly believe that, local government should have less revenue over time, that there needs to be a shift or a rebalancing in that regard. I think there are others. There's been a long-standing debate between Tallahassee and city county governments around the state as to how much local control we should provide. And that's going to be a big issue in the debate that happens in this campaign the caller was referring to. Article 8 of the Florida Constitution provides for home rule for both municipalities and for charter counties, the power of self-government. That is going to be a big issue at stake because obviously if this passes, it's going to have a huge impact on the ability of city and county governments to govern themselves. So while I don't know all of the exact motives, anything's possible in Florida politics. I think, we have the amendment now on the ballot, assuming it withstands judicial scrutiny and it remains on the ballot. I think there's likely to be a very robust campaign between now and November.
Do you think this particular issue will bring more voters out, or do you think people are just more engaged now and will come out anyways?
It's hard to say. Typically the types of issues that sort of draw voters are maybe less financially related. And I think this particular proposition probably impacts voters, homeowners who are more likely to come to the ballot in any event. So I don't know what, if any, impact it'll have on voter turnout there at any given time. Each voter has different reasons for coming to the polls. And at any given time, there are a host of issues that might draw people out. I think, for example, in both the national and the state environment right now, the inflationary situation is something that's likely to draw voters to the polls. Whether this adds to this or not, only time will tell.
Is there any indication whether this could pass? 60% is a high amount to have to get to pass the amendment.
Yeah, there's been some polling done on this particular amendment, and you'll see some polls that show that this does exceed the 60% threshold, others that show that it doesn't quite reach that number. I think we're going to see a lot more polling over the next several months as, this proposal potentially gets fine-tuned and ultimately is placed on the ballot, once the August primary is behind us. I think it's very possible this could pass. Look, this is a situation, there are sometimes tax cuts that people in elective office provide or promise that the benefits are uncertain. I don't think there's any question that if this passes, property tax bills across the state are going to drop precipitously. I think the debate in the campaign is going to be not whether this truly cuts property taxes or not, but what the impacts of that are going to be and how local governments may have to make up that revenue. In other words, if they cut property taxes but have to impose fees or come up with other kind of revenue-raising ideas to help fund those core services, will voters at the end of the day see an effective tax cut because they're having to pay fees of a different kind? So those will be the kinds of issues that are debated. But no, I think it's very possible this passes in Florida. Property tax amendments have generally been successful, not just in Florida, but around the country. Most famously, this all sort of started back in the late 70s in California with what was called Proposition 13. Most property tax amendments in Florida have been successful, including one in 2008 that passed the state and raised the homestead exemption at that time from $25,000 to $50,000. So again, there's generally successful. I think it's uncertain at this point. This one is going to be could go one way or the other.
Let's go to Gideon on the north side. Good morning, Gideon.
Hi, good morning. Interestingly enough, the gentleman just actually covered the question that I was going to ask. Basically, it was, what if an option was given or an idea is passed around to raise the sale taxes to, I think, about 8%? Whatever we are now, just raise it by 1 point. Wouldn't that generate enough revenue to cover areas that probably might lose out on revenue if the property taxes get cut. I'll
Thanks
take
for,
the comment off.
Thank you, Gideon. What are your thoughts on the sales tax?
Well, remember, the sales tax is state imposed, not sort of locally imposed. So right now we have a base sales tax in Florida of 6%. There's a local option of up to, depending on your particular city or county, up to about 1.5 additional percent. So you could have as much as a 7.5% sales tax. The challenge with the sales tax, I think, from a local government standpoint, is twofold. One, again, that's revenue that sort of flows into the state. Tallahassee then sort of shares with city and county governments as opposed to coming in directly to them. There are those who are concerned that the sales tax is regressive, that it impacts lower income Floridians more than it does higher income Floridians, and that it ultimately gives the state control over how those revenues are distributed, which, again, in the minds of those who have concerns about this, takes away from that idea of home rule or local control we were talking about a little bit earlier. So proposals like that have been floated over time. In this environment, do I think the Florida legislature is likely to raise the sales tax by a full penny? That seems unlikely.
If you're just joining us, we're talking to government expert Chris Hand about property taxes. You can join the conversation on air by calling 904-549-2937 or go to firstcoastconnect.org to find all the ways you can connect with us. And right now, we want to go to Alex on the west side. Go ahead, Alex. Oh, apologize. Alex isn't there anymore. Let me ask you a little bit about why Governor DeSantis decided to choose this rather than an issue like homeowners insurance.
Well, I think there are people who are asking that question. This is probably an easier issue for an elected official, particularly in Tallahassee, to impact some sort of pricing. Homeowners insurance, making changes to the market, and the legislature has passed initiatives in recent years to try and kind of rebalance that market. There's a lot out of an elected official's control in trying to change homeowners insurance. Property taxes, if this were to pass, like I said, there would be, a very short-term and visible benefit on people's property taxes. And it's one that really wouldn't impact the state's finances at all. It would generally only impact city and county government finances. So, again, I certainly, don't want to try and guess the governor's motives per se. He can speak to that. But I think from a tax cut standpoint, it is something that can be done rather immediately, have a significant impact, doesn't affect the state government coffers. And I think, that as any governors in the last year of their term, they're trying to build legacy items for him. This would be a way for him to leave office saying that he had left Floridians with a significant tax cut. Now, as we said, the issue is much more complicated than that. And there's a question of how do you then fund core services and what role does the state play? And are there other fees that come in? But by that time, there'll be a new governor in Florida.
All right, thank you so much. We want to go again to Alex in Atlantic Beach. Good morning, Alex.
Yes, good morning. My friends call me Creech, and what I'm concerned about with this proposal is that it just feels like a regressive tax for the less fortunate of our community, because the non-homeowners are the ones that aren't going to find a benefit. But then, like as the previous caller talked about, increasing the sales tax, they will directly have to pay more for all the other services, not to mention any other public or core services that will be a detriment after this passes.
Thanks, Alex. That's a good point. The difference between homeowners and renters and who funds our roads and potholes and how all of that gets fixed. What are your thoughts on that?
I think that's I think the caller has identified what is likely to be one of the great tensions in this debate, that, yes, this is designed to benefit homeowners, the very large number of Floridians who don't own homes but instead rent, something that, a phenomenon that's been exacerbated by the affordability crisis and the, sharp spike in home prices that's, made it very difficult for people to become homeowners in Florida and other parts of the country right now. I think there's no question that, those who oppose the amendment have kind of focused on talking about that this doesn't provide a benefit to renters, which, again, is a very large population of the state. So the concern the caller has raised is one that we've already heard in this debate, and I think we'll hear a lot more over the next few months.
Let's take another caller. Charles on the west side. Good morning, Charles.
Good morning, everybody. Chris, I wanted to ask you specifically, if this goes through, will it have any kind of effect on our garbage pickup fees? Or will that be like broken out separately or something?
It's a good question. And will some of these services end up having to be privatized?
I think all of that is possible. So, Charles, it won't, this does not directly have an impact on the garbage fee. It may have an indirect impact in the sense that if this passes, I know one area that local governments around the state are looking at is, do they need to increase existing fees? The garbage fee would be a good example. Here in Jacksonville, we also have a stormwater fee. There's a franchise fee the city gets that kind of goes on people's JEA bill as well. So I think it's possible that cities have to look at increasing existing fees or adding new ones. I think one model that cities and counties are considering is more of a fee-for-service model going forward, where it's almost like going to a menu. You can't buy the buffet anymore. Now you just have to buy individual items. So you're getting a particular invoice for fire services. Maybe you're getting one for police services, for public works. That's another model they're looking at. So I think it could indirectly impact fees. And to your point, Hedl, I think governments will have to look at, are there opportunities to engage in public-private partnerships or privatize certain services? I think particularly as it comes to paying for infrastructure. Look, that is a big thing that local governments do. They build streets, they pave streets, they put in drainage, they build sidewalks, they replace septic tanks with central sewer and water systems. That's very expensive. And while cities can borrow money to do that, that money's not for free. They're annually paying back that debt service in their annual budgets. Well, once some of this money goes away, they're going to have to find new ways to pay for that infrastructure. Public-private partnership arrangements, like you referred to, I think are going to become more common, as are things potentially like tolls. As you know, City of Jacksonville voters voted to do away with tolls in the late 1980s. They've kind of come back a little bit with the Outer Beltway and some, parts of I-295, these express lanes, but that may be a financing mechanism that local governments have to rely on with private partners to help fund critical infrastructure.
I remember those tolls growing up in Jacksonville when you were going over the bridge,
right.
And people did not like them. It was not a popular idea. What about rural communities, especially? They can be more vulnerable if something like this were to happen because so much of their funding comes from property tax.
Well, that's an excellent point, Hedl. Not just rural communities, but smaller cities, even in non-rural communities around the country. But you're absolutely right. Those cities and counties that rely heavily, if not sort of predominantly, on homestead property tax revenues could suddenly find themselves in an existential crisis, whether they can continue to exist as a city or county because of the revenue they no longer have. There's been some discussion in Tallahassee about maybe we would set up a fund to be able to provide money and help them with that, but that's not concrete. It's certainly not in this amendment. Whether the legislature would take action in that regard is very uncertain, and we wouldn't even have the first idea of that until the 2027 session started.
Let's now take another caller, Denise from Mayport Village. Good morning, Denise.
Hi, Mr. Hand. I thought you said earlier, or you indicated that the governor couldn't do much about reducing home insurance premiums. But I think you should point out that one of the reasons he hasn't even bothered to try is because he took over $4 million from the insurance lobby during his last gubernatorial campaign. So that leads me to think there probably are some things he could do to address the high cost of homeowners insurance, but he doesn't want to. He'd rather just reduce property taxes and tell us to spend that savings on our home insurance premiums.
Thanks for the call, Denise. Do you have any thoughts on that, Chris?
Well, just to clarify, I did not say that the governor, there was nothing he could do or any elected officials could do. They've tried to take action or pass bills. People can debate whether or not those were effective or were ever going to be effective. But it's not that they can't do anything. It's that the impacts of whatever action they take on homeowners insurance are often years into the future and not as visible as potentially lowering property taxes. So, again, I think one of the benefits, politically speaking, from this property tax amendment push is that it's clear, it's a visible impact. You don't have to wait around for years. If this passes, people begin to see the impacts on their property tax bills in 2027 and beyond. So again, It's not that the governor can't do anything on homeowners insurance, and I think the governor and the legislature would argue they've tried to do some things. It's that the impact of those efforts is not as visible as it would be for property taxes.
I want to move on now to discuss the referendum to extend the $1 million property tax. There's been a lot of confusion with people thinking this is a new tax rather than renewing an existing one. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Of course. So back in November of 2022, voters in Duval County elected to add an additional 1 mil to their school-based property tax. And again, as we said earlier, this has nothing to do with that property tax amendment we were just discussing because schools are exempted from that. But the voters agreed to add 1 mil, which is about $1 for every $1,000 in taxable value, to their school property taxes to help fund teacher pay and various arts and athletics programs. That expires after 4 years. It expires later this year. So the Duval County School Board has elected to go back to the voters and ask for an extension of that 1 mil property tax enhancement they've been paying for the last 4 years. Last week, the Jacksonville City Council voted unanimously to place it on the ballot. Under state law, that's really just kind of what you'd call a ministerial act. They're just required. They're the local governing body. They have to put it on the ballot, and they elected to do so last week.
Why did they delay it in the first place?
Much as has been the case in the past when they've been asked to put sort of school board initiatives, I think they, have concerns about, they wanted to ask questions about what's the impact of this. I think they have concerns about, does this mean we're automatically endorsing a property tax increase? So it's not uncommon for the city council to have debate on this. But at the end of the day, what the council decided was kind of consistent with state law. Their job was simply to put this on the ballot so that voters can decide this in November. It sets up kind of an interesting political dynamic in November in that, again, if the property tax amendment survives and does appear on the ballot, voters on the one hand are going to be asked statewide whether they want to reduce their non-school property taxes. And here in Duval County, they'll be asked whether they want to extend this kind of 1 mil increase that they originally approved in 2022.
Now, a big part of this tax extension, as you mentioned, is funding teacher salaries. And there's an interesting new study that shows that according to the Bureau of Labor Statistics, here in Florida, private school jobs increased 1.6%, while public school jobs decreased the same percentage. What's going on here? Many critics say it's a direct result of the school voucher program. Does that make it even more critical that this tax extension is passed?
Well, it's an interesting kind of story that you pointed out, Hedl, where Florida added, according to state economists, about in the last year, just over 36,000 education and healthcare jobs. That addition included about 1,600 jobs in the private K through 12 education space. And as you say, those numbers also reflect a loss of about 5,000 jobs in the public K through 12 education space. And some of the speculation among economists is this is what's called a substitution effect, that as teachers, we're cutting back teaching jobs in the public sector. Some of those are now migrating to the private sector. In fact, if you look at on a percentage basis, those private jobs went up by 1.6%. The public jobs went down by exactly 1.6%. So that leads people to believe that factors like the private school voucher, the universal private school voucher program that Florida now has, is having an impact on this, and certainly will be an argument, I think, that proponents of this Duval County Public Schools tax extension will make in the lead up to November, that, the state's losing teachers. We need to be able to pay them so that we, keep them in the public sector and not going to the private sector.
And just to clarify for people, this extension costs on average for the Jacksonville homeowner about $300 annually. Again, it was passed before and it will be up for voters again. Another form of revenue that the Duval County School District is pursuing is selling their headquarters on Prudential Drive. They currently have 3 offers ranging from $15.5 million to $17.5 million. And some say it's been a bit of a messy process. Explain why.
Well, this is one could argue this is, the multiple times, but certainly the second time the school board has tried to find, Duval County Public Schools have tried to find a buyer for their riverfront location on the South Bank here in Jacksonville. They originally had reached an agreement with Chase Properties, very well-known, well-regarded a developer here in Jacksonville, to sell the property for about $17 million. As they began to do the due diligence on that deal, Chase discovered a variety of kind of land use problems with the property and ultimately kind of withdrew from the deal. School board kind of went back out to get more bids, and they got three, two of which are really sort of serious bids. One from Bainbridge, which is a Central Florida real estate firm, in the amount of about $15.5 million for all of the properties and the building itself. A local company, Ashco, has also provided a bid which could be as much as $17.5 million in terms of how it's structured. We don't know yet where the school board might move if they were to sell the property, or how long they might stay on the property with a new owner. But they are back on the market, and it does appear the school board's trying to move forward with finding a buyer so that the long-discussed goal of moving Duval County Public Schools headquarters off the St. Johns River may move forward.
And they actually lost money on that first deal, right?
Right. I mean, it ended up being there was earnest money that was put down that I think they sacrificed in that issue. So they're probably proceeding cautiously now and want to make sure that they've got the deal put together. I think there's some universal agreement that it's probably not optimal to have government buildings directly on the river, and that it's a positive thing to move the school board to a new location. But as always, the devil's in the details, and it's been very difficult to find kind of the right agreement for a buyer that will actually kind of move forward, and to find a new headquarters. I mean, the Duval County Public Schools utilize a lot of space, not just at their Prudential Drive headquarters, but at other facilities they have around town. And part of the goal of this relocation has also been a consolidation to bring everything together in one space. And that's difficult. There aren't a ton of sites in the city of Jacksonville that have that amount of square footage. So we'll keep an eye on that, but it does appear that the Duval County Public Schools are moving forward with trying to find a new place to have their headquarters located.
Another hot issue at City Hall has been tax incentives. We talked earlier this week about how those can help boost downtown restaurants, but there's been some controversy regarding incentives for Publix to come downtown. Incoming City Council President Nick Howland said on this show that the city may not be able to afford the cash incentives that have been promised to Gateway Jacks. Is it realistic to offer these types of cash incentives?
Well, a number of city council members are now asking that question. In fact, in the last year, Councilmember Will Lanin, District 3, kind of led an effort to explore these what are called completion grants, just sort of grants of funds the city provides to developers after they have kind of finished a product. That's actual cash right out of the city of Jacksonville's general fund budget. So it tends to be very expensive. They add up, particularly with some of these concerns about the property tax amendment and what that might do to local revenues, which are already under pressure for other reasons. And of course, inflation has put an upward push on city costs as well. Some council members, like incoming Council President Howland, have questioned whether the city can afford these sorts of completion grants. The overall project that would bring Publix downtown, Gateway Jacks, the developer that's doing some work in downtown, would be building a kind of a 14-story building. The total project cost is about $138 million. They're seeking just under $50 million in total incentives from the city of Jacksonville, but almost $30 million of that would be this cash completion grant. So expect that to get a lot of scrutiny in the upcoming budget process. Not just that, but any cash completion grants, or really any spending where the city of Jacksonville is directing it out of its general fund budget. Given some of these concerns about what the city's revenue picture might look like going forward, I think it's not just this grant that will get scrutiny, but many other forms of expenditure as well.
Do you think some of these incentives have given Jacksonville the boost it needed to kind of develop downtown?
There's a lot of debate about whether incentives are kind of worthwhile. I think in some cases and again, I was at City Hall from 2011 to 2015, and part of an administration where we certainly supported incentives in certain times and for certain types of projects, largely because those were often the difference between that project either coming here, or if you're trying to recruit an employer, that employer deciding to relocate here or stay here if they're considering other options. So I don't think there's any question that this is a tool that cities and counties often use to help try and reinvigorate. I think there's an increasing debate about whether incentives are necessary any longer in downtown Jacksonville, whether they've already done their job in sort of providing kind of that foundational investment in downtown. So I think we're going to see a lot more of that over the budget process, that debate over are incentives worth it given some of the budget challenges. And I think council's going to answer a lot of those questions during the budget process because, of course, they fund the money the Downtown Investment Authority has to provide incentives, as well as other monies the city of Jacksonville might use to incentivize not just downtown projects, but economic development projects. So expect a very robust debate about that during the budget process this year.
But is there anything they can do if they've already promised those incentives?
Well, most city contracts are sort of premised on the idea that there are funds available, right? If they've done, if funds are available, then they can provide that. So, city council retains the power of the purse, and depending on kind of what agreements have been signed and exactly what legislation has been passed, at the end of the day, if city council makes a fiscal decision that it can't fund those grants, they may look for alternatives. One of the things that incoming council president Howland talked about on the program was perhaps private entities could get involved to provide some of that funding. So again, I think we haven't had this debate in a long time in Jacksonville. I think it's just sort of been an article of faith that incentives are important and should absolutely be part of the economic development structure we have here. Given the new revenue challenges, I think there is, for the first time in quite some time, going to be a debate as to whether incentives are providing the return on investment to justify keeping them in increasingly revenue-restricted times.
Speaking of city council, Duval County voters will get an early taste of the 2027 city election when they choose in August between Monet Holder and Deborah Wesley for an at-large city council seat. Could you talk about the importance of the city council seats and the impact that either Wesley or Holder would have if elected?
Sure. This is unusual in that we don't typically see city council elections in an even-numbered year, but Terrence Freeman, who represents City Council at-large Group 1, is running for the Florida legislature and as a result has resigned his seat. This special election will fill that seat at-large Group 1 through June 30th, 2027. It will be back on the ballot next spring for a full 4-year term. And remember how our city council is structured here. We have 19 members, 14 represent individual districts, 5 are at large, meaning that the members have to live in a particular part of the city, but they represent the entire city on the city council. So they tend to have a citywide perspective. So anytime you're electing one of the 19 council members, it's very important. They obviously will make big decisions. This person who is elected, most likely in August, there are just the two candidates. There is a libertarian candidate, but assuming that one of these two major party candidates gets a majority in August, they will participate in some of these very important budget deliberations going forward and all the other major issues that the city of Jacksonville tackles. And they'll represent every person in the city of Jacksonville. Remember, like I said earlier, all of us as citizens, we don't have one member of council. We have 6 who we directly elect. Our district council member and the 5 at-large members who we directly vote for as well. So this is one of those opportunities for citizens to go to the polls and have a say in who their direct representation will be on the Jacksonville City Council.
Always a great conversation with you, Chris Hand. Thanks so much for being here. Up next, we meet the award-winning filmmaker behind a documentary chronicling the civil rights movement in St. Augustine. Welcome back. An award-winning documentary reveals how local activists and a Black Air Force veteran ignited a violent confrontation over segregation that drew Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. to the nation's oldest city. It would help pave the way for the enactment of the Civil Rights Act of 1964. Joining us this morning is journalist and documentary filmmaker Clennon L. King. Thank you for being here today.
Thank you, Havel.
Well, the documentary is called Passage at St. Augustine, the 1964 Black Lives Matter movement that transformed America. Many people are familiar with some of the events that took place in Montgomery, Selma, and Birmingham, less so with St. Augustine. Why was that campaign so important from a historical perspective?
Well, at 30,000 feet, when you think about the turning point of various wars, there are certain battlefields that are really important. So if you think about the Revolutionary War, the turning point without question would have to be Saratoga. When you think about the turning point where it concerns the Civil War, without question, it is Gettysburg. Well, the turning point regarding the battle that was the civil rights movement was St. Augustine. It's not Birmingham, it's not Montgomery, it's not Albany, it's not Selma, it's St. Augustine. It was about 2 weeks after that the president then signed the Civil Rights Act of 1964. So this is a defining battle without question.
And in the documentary really highlights that President Lyndon B. Johnson was saying behind the scenes that he was in support of civil rights. But what he said in some of those conversations was very contrary to that.
Well, I don't know. I mean, I think he was a very savvy litigator. I mean, he was head of the Senate beforehand. So he's a very smart man, very strategic, and I think he knew exactly what he was doing without question. He wanted this, and he was playing with the Dixiecrats, doing what he needed to do to ultimately get the 60 votes he needed to get this thing, passed. And
but in terms of supporting the movement, he did not seem that he was supporting the protesters in St. Augustine. He would say very negative things about the protesters.
Oh, he said negative things. At the end of the day, though, he was always working toward
getting the Civil Rights Act
absolutely,
passed.
without question. There's no question about that. Well, I mean, part of it is because of the fact he knew that in order to succeed and stay in office for re-election after Kennedy assassination, he had to go ahead and make sure this legislation was passed.
Which was Kennedy's legacy.
Exactly.
It took 13 years to compile this film, and you interviewed about 40 people who were on the front lines. How were you able to get some of these interviews, like the son of a former Ku Klux Klan member, the former sheriff, and his daughter?
Part of it is, I don't know if you remember the film Taken, but there's a thing he says, if you're looking for money, I don't have any. But I have a special set of skills developed over a long career, skills that make me a nightmare. The bottom line is that as a journalist, because I spent the bulk of my career as a journalist, NBC Dallas, ABC Atlanta, Fox Miami, I knew how to do that. I knew how to secure interviews. And so I just, I went out of my way to go ahead and convince these people that, they needed to do this for history's sake.
You describe in one scene how Klan members violently damaged the teeth and jaw of one of the leaders of this movement, Dr. Robert Haling, who was a dentist and, again, a leader of the civil rights movement in St. Augustine. Why was it so important to describe in such graphic detail? And did it have a chilling effect at all on the movement?
No, I think it was going on all over the place in terms of, Klan rallies and that kind of thing. Did what have a chilling effect? You mean the detail?
The violence.
Oh, no, without question. Well, I think that Dr. King came to St. Augustine. He chose St. Augustine. Keep in mind, Birmingham was dead in the water. The dogs and water hoses and the 4 little girls basically shut down Birmingham. And that happened basically in the fall, September of 1963. And yet, he had to get this legislation passed. He was facing what became the longest filibuster at that time in the history of the country. And so he needed a campaign to dramatize the challenge of segregation. And there was no better example at that time than St. Augustine. And they were violent and nasty about it. They were really ugly about that, and he needed that. That's how he leveraged in the end. That's why, in fact, that whole scene in terms of the acid in the swimming pool was so dramatic. I mean, you got the president of the United States talking about that, and people over in Russia are publishing articles on that. Yeah, I mean, it got the attention of the world, and he needed that to be able. I'm talking about Dr. King needed that to be able to leverage passage of the legislation and convince the Senate to break this filibuster and move forward, and they did.
You were speaking about the Monson Motor Lodge event with the swimming pool, and a former college student, Robert Swan, who witnessed that iconic incident, will actually be at the event that you were going to be at, and is going to be showing never seen before color photos captured by his brother Nick. Why is that so important? And tell me more about this event.
Well, I mean, the long and short of it is I start at 4:00 in terms of actually screening the film, but at 6:00, because afterwards we'll have a post-screening discussion. At 6:00, he'll come in. He, again, happened to be there on this day 62 years ago, on June 18th, 62 years ago. He's going through St. Augustine with his brother and their college students, and the brother has a color camera. And none of the stuff that you see in terms of newsreel footage is in color. So this is in color. And so this is in many respects a sort of time capsule. And you're seeing it at a different angle. So that's why it's important.
You're a native of Albany, Georgia, and the son of a civil rights lawyer. How is it that the St. Augustine Film Project came onto your radar screen?
Well, because for that very reason, I know, I mean, when your father is representing, I mean, King was only at a handful of battles, and my father was at one of them, and he was the litigator that represented him. So you have to know in the end all of these battlefields. So when I got hired by the NBC and ABC affiliate, First Coast News here, I knew that St. Augustine was an important one coming in.
And you grew up with that.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely.
The 1964 St. Augustine campaign happened more than 60 years ago. When you look at where St. Augustine is in 2026, what has been the lasting legacy and how much has really changed?
Well, I think that St. Augustine has gone through, in my view, because, again, it's really been close to 25 years that I first shot this film. It was around 2001 when I first started shooting it, and now it's 2026. So you're talking about close to 25 years. Long story short, I think there's an ethnic cleansing that has happened in St. Augustine, and I say it for this reason. There was a historically black college, which is where the movement really came out of. A historically black college that had to be moved as a result of that campaign.
And so Florida.
At that time, black folk were obviously 1 in every 4 people. So you're talking about 25%. Now it's less than 3%. It was 25% in 64, and now it's less than 3. That's ethnic cleansing. And so while I'm happy about this mayor coming in, that's all fine and well. To me, it's more window dressing than anything else.
I do want to get to the event again that's going to be taking place at St. Paul AME Church, Thursday, June 18th from 4 to 8 p.m. Thank you so much for joining us. Fascinating documentary. We'll be right back after the break.
Thank you.
I'm Scott Tong. A Muslim American immigrant says he feels proud when he looks at the American flag.
The flag does not represent an administration or the current government. I think the flag represents the country that we live and we love.
His son strongly disagrees. Generational divide next time Here and Now.
Today at 1 on WJCT News 89.9.
On the next Fresh Air, comedian Ali Sadiq
He served 6 years in a Texas prison and turned his life into some of the most watched storytelling in comedy. He has a new special out in time for Father's Day called My Father, about a man who wasn't always there, but who Sadiq wanted to be like anyway. Join us.
Today at noon on WJCT News 89.9.
In 1852, Frederick Douglass spoke in Rochester, New York, and he started by praising the Declaration of Independence.
And then the hammer comes down. He says, "Pardon me. Why have you invited me here on the 4th of July? The 4th of July is yours, not mine. You may rejoice. I must mourn. Why would you invite me into your temple of liberty?"
What to the slave is the 4th of July? That's on the next On Point.
Today at 11 on WJCT News 89.9.
A local special election in the UK this week could determine the country's next prime minister. As the far right gains ground in the UK, this could also be the center-left Labour Party's last chance to reconnect with voters for a long time. What's riding on this one regional election and why? Next time on 1A.
Today starting at 10 on WJCT News 89.9.
Welcome back. Do you have an idea for a sculpture? Artists have just under 2 weeks to submit an idea for a new public sculpture at the newly named Fishweir Crossing Roundabouts. Nancy Powell, the Fishweir Crossing Roundabouts Planning Committee co-chair, is here to tell us how you can get involved. Nancy, first, where is Fishweir Crossing located?
Fishweir Crossing is, if people know, it's at the edge of the historic district of Riverside, Avondale, where Fishweir Creek is. It's where Herschel Street meets St. John's Avenue. So a lot of people know it from Fishweir Elementary, which is very close by. And so it's a confluence of neighborhoods, Avondale, Fairfax. It's the road to Ortega.
And we have a picture up so people who are watching on YouTube can check it out. What is the goal of this project and what are some of the requirements?
Okay, well, the goal of the project is really to kick off a beautification effort of this very unique place and to bring it to have an identity and to have a pride of place. The roundabouts were put in about 3 years ago by the FDOT, the Florida Department of Transportation, and they really have improved the traffic flow. There used to be streetlights there, and if people know Jacksonville, there are roundabouts being put in a lot of places. But it also just has some weeds there now. So we are hoping to have at least one of them have a piece of unique sculpture. And then the other one, maybe a sculpture or maybe some trees or landscaping. There's not a lot of space in these places, so we have to be creative on that. And what we're looking at right now to kick it off is a request for qualifications. So we're not at the stage yet where people are actually submitting design ideas. That would be the next phase. We're hoping to pick 3 artists from their qualifications of doing public art, sculpture, outdoor. There's a lot of nuances for what you have to do to make a durable piece of sculpture outdoors in a roundabout situation.
What is the timeline for the project?
Well, the request for qualifications is from June 1st to June 30th. From there, we are planning, the Planning Committee and the Art Selection Committee are planning to pick 3 artists or up to 3 artists who are qualified to take the next step, which would be to do the conceptual design work so that we will have an idea of what that sculpture might look like, how it relates to the area, how it celebrates the nature and the place, and be unique there. And that next phase, we will pay the artists $2,500 each to deliver the designs. After that, we need to make sure that the FDOT and all the road and the city are, they would meet those qualifications so that we can then bring it to the community and have some community engagement on it.
So the neighbors actually reached out to RAP to make these improvements. Why?
Well, because the roundabouts went in, and then they're not as aesthetic as we would like them to be. And several of us, anybody who's traveled in other parts of the country, you see some really great roundabouts. And even in Jacksonville, if you go to San Marco, they've got a beautiful roundabout. They just put a beautiful roundabout in front of Jacksonville University. So as they build more roundabouts, I think there's a sense that these can also be unique and fun and enjoyable places to drive through or to walk through, and to be pedestrian oriented also.
Do you have to worry about flooding in that area? Is that something you have to consider when putting something in, or?
Well, probably. The roundabouts, the more important requirements are really to make sure that the driving experience is safe. And so that's where we have some restrictions right now, but again, we're looking at qualifications. So we're going to explain all the restrictions to the next group where they do the design. But there's flooding, there's lighting, there's durability. There will be we expect there to be a traffic pedestal on which the art will be on top of. And so that will provide safety and flood control, perhaps. But yes, the durability of the materials and the visibility and how it all relates together are going to be some of the factors once we get to that stage.
And I wanted to ask you, on a personal note, you are newly retired. How has that been, and what have you been doing in your free time?
Well, this is one of my projects. So I've gotten involved with this is a volunteer project for me. It's something that I was engaged with before, a couple of years ago when they were doing the roundabouts, they were planning the roundabouts. I was with Riverside Avondale Preservation. And I want to say that Riverside Avondale Preservation is the host organization for this. So it's a group of volunteers, but it's also Riverside Avondale will help us from a fundraising perspective and to hold the funds as we raise private money for this. This is not a city-funded effort at this time, and we don't expect it to be. So we are launching a fundraising campaign also.
Well, thank you, Nancy Powell, so much for being here. That's our show for today. I'm Ethel Butt in for Ann Schindler, and don't forget, we're off tomorrow, and we'll be back on Monday. Have a great day.
Support for First Coast Connect is provided by Baptist Health and the North Florida TPO.
Baptist Health is a proud supporter of First Coast Connect. Baptist Health, committed to building a healthier community for all of us. More info at 202-4YOU or baptistjacks.com. The North Florida TPO is committed to shaping our transportation future. We're focused on planning, funding, clean fuels, and new technologies for a vibrant, connected community. Learn more at northfloridatpo.com. Terrell Hogan Law.
I'm Wayne Hogan. When people are hurt through no fault of their own, finding the who, what, when, where, why, and how that led to the accident is critical to proving the truth.
More at terrellhoganlaw.com.
This is WJCT News 89.9 Jacksonville. Up next, national and local news from NPR and the WJCT News team.
A local election in the UK could determine the country's next prime minister. What does that mean for the political direction of the nation? From WAMU and NPR in Washington, this is 1A. Hi, I'm Jen White. The political future of the UK could hinge on roughly 75,000 voters and especially